Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition.
Always good to be here. How are you finding the day?
Absolutely fantastic, thanks.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for what we're getting into today because it's a concept that, well, it pretty much haunts everyone we know. From high school students to CEOs, this constant, relentless pursuit of success.
Right.
And even more provocatively, we're looking at the moral dilemma that just tags along with it. Is every path, every means justified to get to that goal?
It's a question everyone faces.
It is. And for you listening, you've definitely been there, I'm sure. That feeling of, the necessary hustle versus those quiet little ethical trade-offs.
That's right. And I think the core challenge for us to analyze here is why that common, that externally defined version of success.
The money, the titles.
Exactly. The money, the status. Why it so often leaves a person feeling kind of shallow or just empty, even when they finally get there.
That Yvonne Beer-Hughes, that bland feel.
Precisely. Our mission today is to move past that surface-level definition and really explore what a truly functional, self-aware, and, well, successful existence actually looks like.
And it's not just about new habits, is it?
Yeah.
It's something deeper.
So it requires a complete intellectual overhaul.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This idea of internal success. I guess we have to start with the calming stuff, those grand, youthful ideals.
We've all had them.
Oh, absolutely. Dreaming of being a rock star or, making immense wealth, having the yacht. I certainly had a few versions of that in my 20s.
Sure.
But the really profound insight from our research is that achieving these things often leads not to fulfillment, but to the state of just profound unhappiness or confusion. Why is that?
It's because the goals themselves were structured incorrectly from the very beginning.
How so?
We have to redefine success.
Yeah.
It's not about external accumulation, the yacht, the corner office, but a state that some sources call effortless living.
Effortless living.
When you look at people who actually hit those big external markers, they often realize the struggle to get there and then to maintain it. It was just fundamentally wrong. It leads to huge psychological issues because they were, in essence, fighting their own nature.
But that idea, effortless living, that sounds like a complete paradox, doesn't it?
It does on the surface, absolutely.
Because everything we're taught, from day one is about effort, the grind. You have to strive.
The hustle culture.
Exactly. So how can success, real success, ever require no effort?
Well, the initial effort is substantial. It's huge. But, and this is the key, it's directed inward, not outward.
Okay.
The paradox is that the effort is all aimed at eliminating that unnecessary internal struggle, what we might call friction.
And what is that friction made of?
It's anxiety, it's status anxiety, fear of failure, the constant need for someone else to say you're doing okay, external validation. Once you've sort of polished your internal system and achieved real self-knowledge, the maintenance of your life, your function, it just flows naturally without that constant cognitive burden of fighting yourself.
That makes so much sense. If you look at nature, no other creature really struggles just to exist.
Not at all.
A wolf or a dolphin.
Yeah.
They live without this effort unless they're, actively hunting or defending themselves.
Right.
But humans, we are constantly burning massive mental and emotional energy just to maintain our status, it feels like we're just floundering unnecessarily, trapped in this internal combat.
And that unnecessary struggle is the ultimate tell. It's the indicator that the goal is completely mismatched to the self.
So if you're constantly fighting to stay on top.
Yes. If you are struggling just to maintain a peak fame is a perfect example, and you have to sacrifice your joy, your real relationships, your inner peace.
Just to stay there.
Then the structure of that success is fundamentally wrong. Your true function should align so perfectly with your nature that your existence becomes easy, sustainable, not brittle and stressful.
Which I think leads us right to the problem with the word success itself.
It's a dangerous word.
It's so dangerous because the definition is constantly shifting, isn't it, throughout our lives? It starts with getting good grades.
A prestigious degree.
Then the right job, then social status, and now it's follower counts, which is just alarming.
And what's crucial to understand here is that all of these external metrics, whether it's an A+ or $1 million, they are just carrots. Carrots held up to our noses.
Right.
We chase them because society basically guarantees they'll make us happy.
Yeah.
But the universal experience again and again is that once you get it, it fails to satisfy.
The void is still there.
The emotional void is still there, and the goalpost just moves further down the field.
And the root cause for this, according to some very deep philosophical traditions, is, well, it's the core human drama, right? But humanity is the only living thing that forgets what it is. We just lose sight of our own inherent nature.
Exactly. Without deep self-knowledge, I mean, this is the ancient fundamental directive, know thyself. You cannot set goals that are actually appropriate for your natural makeup.
It seems so obvious when you put it like that.
Well, if you don't truly understand your own talents, your limitations, your authentic desires, how on earth can you set a course that leads to genuine, sustainable satisfaction? It's impossible.
It brings to mind that really powerful, almost painful analogy of the fish.
Oh, yes. The fish that's miserable because it dreams of flying like a bird.
Right. Its whole existence is just defined as failure because it keeps fighting its own nature.
Trying to sprout wings, trying to walk on land, it's a disaster.
When all along, it's true, effortless successes.
Just swimming. That's it. So we have to focus on our internal self-realization.
And when we look at the practical side of this, focusing on that internal excellence, it completely changes our relationship with things like wealth.
Completely. Material wealth, status, all of it.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be a result, a byproduct that flows from doing your authentic purpose exceptionally well. They're not the goal itself.
So if you're great at what you're naturally built for,
Compensation naturally follows. But pursuing wealth as the aim is, as you said, almost universally counterproductive.
why counterproductive specifically?
Because the mechanism of just accumulating money for money's sake relies on a competitive zero-sum struggle that just creates more of that internal friction we talked about.
And you see this even among the wealthiest people.
Oh, absolutely. I've met profoundly unhappy, intensely wealthy individuals, and you have to ask why. Because once they hit that monetary goal, the new all-consuming objective becomes the anxiety of keeping the money.
Ah, so it shifts from creation to defense.
Entirely. They are no longer focused on their function, but on defense. And that perpetual fear of loss, of status slipping, of future ruin, it's a deep source of misery that no amount of money can ever solve.
That defense mechanism is friction. And speaking of friction, I think a massive source of that for most people listening is risk avoidance. We get paralyzed by the fear of failure, especially when we're trying to do something that feels really valuable.
That avoidance, it might be the single greatest inhibitor of self-realization. Risk is absolutely 100% inherent to any valuable endeavor.
You can't separate them.
You can't. Learning, development, mastery, they are all inevitably tied to the experience you gain from making mistakes. You must fail.
But our culture treats failure like a catastrophe.
I know. But think about it. The sources we've looked at point to successful entrepreneurs, true innovators, who fail 30, 40 times, in big ways and small ways, before something finally catches fire. Failure is the raw material. It's the fuel.
Which is hard to accept when you fall into what we might call the perfect trap.
The paralysis of perfectionism.
Yes, the thinking error that just prevents you from acting at all.
It's the belief that if you can't achieve the absolute best outcome, like right now, instantly, you shouldn't even try. The perfect is the enemy of the good.
It's the classic dictum. Yes, you see it everywhere. The person who never launches their project because the website isn't 100% perfect. The student who won't submit a creative piece because they feel they haven't achieved mastery.
Every step is experience.
Every courageous, imperfect step is valuable experience, period.
And if you avoid that traditional, very crowded, competitive structure, you're almost forced to find an original path.
You are. And that's where true non-competitive success often lies. When you step off that crowded path, you have to embrace the initial failure that comes with originality.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about someone with, say, minimal theater experience who decides to write and stage a play anyway. They will almost certainly fail the first time, maybe the second, in conventional terms.
Right.
But that willingness to try something new, despite knowing there will be early mistakes, that is the hallmark of exponential growth. And eventually, of a very unique kind of success. This is great. But now we have to circle back to the moral core we started with, because it underpins the whole structure of this striving.
The question of the means.
Exactly. We've established the how is crucial for internal peace. So, should one harm others, violate their own ethics to get a goal? Is everything permissible?
No, absolutely not. And this brings us back to those fundamental boundaries. My perspective, drawn from the deepest insights we've analyzed, is, well, it's definitive. Someone without principles has no path.
Ilkizi olmayanın yolu olmaz.
Exactly. Principles, values, they have to be your non-negotiable compass needles. If your internal system is based on harming others, any success that comes from it is just fundamentally flawed. It's guaranteed to generate massive internal friction.
But I can hear the counter-argument now. Doesn't setting up principles like that restrict your freedom? You know, the freedom to pursue huge goals without constraints.
That's a common misconception. Freedom is granted by boundaries, not by the absence of them.
Like a highway.
The highway is the perfect analogy. You are free to drive efficiently at high speed and get where you're going precisely because you obey the road limits and stay in your lane. Those limits prevent chaos and grant you freedom of movement.
And your ethical boundaries are the same.
They are the same. My personal criterion, and the one recommended by so many wisdom traditions, is simple. There is no gain worth causing deliberate pain to another human being.
That's a very clear line. And you mentioned before that this principle even shapes your view on things like competitive sports.
I did, yes. Because many forms of competition, especially in business and sometimes in sports, are zero-sum games.
One person's success requires another's loss.
It necessitates their loss or their suffering. And that kind of system, as the source material points out, is why so many destructive effects of capitalism stem from profit being gained at the expense of others' poverty or pain. When you define your success by someone else's loss, the whole process just becomes toxic.
That completely reframes the idea of competition. So the only true rival, then,
is yourself. It can only be against yourself, measuring your present function against your potential function.
That's it.
Competing against others is futile. They are irrelevant to your own internal calibration. The only meaningful competition is between your present self and a slightly improved future self. That's the only game worth playing.
Okay, let's talk about endurance, because this path requires it. Sometimes success demands what feels like a huge sacrifice. Time away from family, enduring, a tough boss or unfair conditions at work for a while. Where's the line between compromise and protecting your integrity?
This is such a critical distinction, and it really does demand wisdom. Compromise is good. It's necessary if it only affects peripheral things.
Like what?
Learned habits, comfort, convenience. But it must never affect your core self-worth or your ethical values. You can sacrifice an evening out, but you cannot sacrifice your integrity. You can't deliberately violate your principles for a temporary gain.
It makes me think of the old apprenticeship model. It's often dismissed today, but, carrying the bags, fetching the tea, enduring long hours.
Yes, that is all part of the necessary process of self-polishing. It builds patience, saveur, and the humility you need for sustained long-term success.
And if you try to skip that...
Anyone who tries to rush past that stage, skipping that difficult apprenticeship, often finds their efforts just burn out, like a quick straw fire. They don't have the foundation. They lack the deep knowledge that can only be forged in those conditions of, yes, temporary subservience.
If we zoom out again to that core human struggle, why are we the only creatures who expend so much effort just for existence, even when our basic needs are met?
The primary struggle, I believe, often stems from a lack of what we'd call a holistic view of life and a lack of wisdom.
Kind of tunnel vision.
Exactly. So many people are trapped because they are convinced they are poor while they are healthy, they have a roof over their head, they have access to immense knowledge. They're stuck looking only at what they lack externally.
So the escape route from feeling trapped is often just realizing how much you already have.
It's the absolute first step. If you feel like you're struggling just to keep your head above water, it's frequently because you are not seeing and therefore not using the internal resources and health you currently possess. The cognitive burden of worrying about the future is blinding you to the strength you have in the present.
Which brings us to the ultimate lesson here about perspective, and it ties right back to effortlessness. The image in your mind creates your world.
Precisely. The fear of future illness or poverty or death, it prevents you from appreciating the present health and positivity you have right now, which is the necessary foundation for any future growth.
So if you're terrified of getting sick in 5 years,
you can't appreciate the incredible function and health of your body today. If you're constantly staring into the abyss of potential future poverty, you can't see the abundance you have in this moment.
So where do you start?
You must start by acknowledging the positive state you're already in, the absence of illness, the existence of breath, the security of shelter. You have to start there to generate more positive outcomes. People who ascend quickly focus on the high ground. Those who stay trapped are constantly looking down into the pit of potential loss.
Okay, so to synthesize what we've discussed for everyone listening, we've learned that success isn't external accumulation, but internal self-realization,
Right. And that true success shows up as effortless function.
which demands that initial hard effort aimed at eliminating all that cognitive friction.
And we learned that failure is a mandatory teacher. You need it to develop originality.
And finally, that a clear functional path requires those non-negotiable ethical principles to act as your compass.
And if we can leave you with one final thought, maybe consider this. The greatest failure isn't losing wealth or status. It's the inability to live your authentic self fully and realize your natural function.
That's a powerful idea.
So given that you now understand the difference between chasing external achievements and maximizing your internal function, what definition of success, what external carrot are you willing to discard today to focus entirely on cultivating what you truly are?
That is a powerful question to end on. Thank you for engaging with this knowledge, and we wish you clarity and success in your self-exploration.